right. So,
Oh, my gain is down, right?
uh, you tell me if your gate is down.
My gain.
Yes, your gain.
My gain is down. Very good.
Sure.
Am I cracking when I talk to you?
No more than usual. Do you need some more bourbon? We trying to crack?
You're funny.
I try.
All right, here I go. I gotta take. Where's my gain? Yeah, my gain is all the way down. That's what my wife told me I was supposed to do.
Occasionally, I succeed at being funny. So,
All right. Well, I'll make sure to let you know when that happens.
yeah, I'm not counting on it.
Okay, cool.
I suppose we got to welcome people to the latest episode of Dragging Up the Past here.
You think people are listening? You are such a lovely optimist.
Yeah, well, but by now, I mean this is going to be like 4 or 5 episodes in, so by now, I think at least accidentally somebody will have stumbled across us.
Oh, I figured we just like the pleasure of each other's company. But go on, go on.
I'm totally down with that. Also, I mean, there's a reason we all hang out after hours at Origins together when we can. So,
right.
So anyhow, to anyone who's sort of wondering what's going on here, this is Brant and Jim sort of taking a ramble down memory lane as we stumble and straggle through old issues of Dragon magazine and sort of reminisce and make sarcastic remarks and generally have a good time flipping through these things digitally, of course. And there's no particular sequence to the actual magazines we're going through. But we're just having a good time flipping through some old issues and kind of reminiscing and talking and making fun of stuff. Did I miss anything? Is that pretty much it?
No, I think those are our goals.
I think that's kind of where we are. If you hear random exclamations in the background, and I will try to keep expletives to a minimum, I've got the Astros game on in the background, World Series. So priorities, hashtag priorities there. But I do at least have the volume down, so you won't hear, Joe Buck yelling in the background. So Dragon Magazine number 41. There's a particular reason I have pulled this one out. I'm pretty sure this is not an April issue. I've got a track record of sort of randomly managing to grab all the April issues. That wasn't the intent.
Nope. It's September of 1980.
Awesome. So not April. So we'll take a look through here. Hey, look, Ice guys. This is before we started getting very repetitive looking Arms Law, Spell Law type of ads, but it's still the Arms Law, the first of the Rollmaster systems, as well as the Iron Wind with the Lore Master series. But Ice is now starting to invade the advertising pages of Dragon Magazine.
Okay, so where did you learn to type?
On a silly little Space Invaders looking video game on my parents' original 1984 vintage 128K beige box Mac.
Nice.
I'm not one of the first 1,000 Mac users on the planet, but I dare say I'm one of the first 10,000 and probably on the low end of that range. Because my dad bought one early in '84. I think we actually had it before the Super Bowl commercial, the infamous Super Bowl commercial. But my dad got it because it had a really good word processor and he was busy working on his master's thesis in grad school.
See, here's the thing. If you take a look at the text for this ICE ad,
yes,
I learned how to type on an IBM Selectric. That is an unforgiving beast, especially because the old manuals, the ones you see in all the Dashiell Hammett or the Mickey Spillane shows with the punch, clack, clack, clack,
yes,
those you have to be very deliberate about. The Selectric was a soft, sinewy creature that lets you just caress the keys and suddenly make typos. Well,
yes,
on that Selectric, the way you would change your font, if you wanted to in those days, was to pop out the little ball, looked like a squashed pumpkin, that sat in the center of it, and you replaced it with a different font. This ad is typed in one of those fonts. This is immediately to me evocative of the summer of 1978, sitting with my mother, as I say, an executive secretary in her day, typing away, learning the home keys, and typing this. So this was the high quality of typesetting in the fall of 1980, kids. That's what it looked like. Anytime you meet anybody responsible for WYSIWYG, you owe them a big, big, manly hug.
I suppose we probably ought to warn whatever new listeners we have happened to pick up along the way that we're going to remark on the graphic design and visual design in here, given that both of us have, at least on occasion, if not paid the bills, done significant volunteer work doing it.
Yep.
I
Yes,
know
yes.
I've paid the bills doing that multiple times throughout my life, and it, you
Okay,
know,
now I want to make a bet. I want to make a bet. All the way down to the ICE, bottom of the ad.
yes,
How many people know
what
what it
COD is.
means when they say no COD? Can
Um,
you imagine?
well, so it depends on how much of our audience is above the 40 line or below the 40 line, and and the 40 line. I used to joke in the media classes that I taught. So I taught evening classes. It was adult education stuff. It was primarily continuing education students, so folks that were going back to finish their degrees. And the media class that I taught, it was just the survey class of mass communication. And so we had one week where we did books and movies, and one week where we did TV and music, and one week where we did the news business and that kind of stuff. And it was a pretty fast moving class. It only met for 7 weeks. It met for 3 hours a night, but only met for 7 weeks. And and I explained very early on the first day of class, you're going through the syllabus, all the mandatory administrative crap, and then you're sort of explaining what the class is, how it's going to run. And I always joked about, the 40 line up on the wall, that there were going to be references, especially sort of pop culture references made, that only people north of the 40 line were going to get, and that only people south of the 40 line would get. And and it was kind of amusing because that line started as a 35 line, and over the years that I was teaching, it crept further and further up. And quite frankly, it's probably a 45 line now, even though I haven't been teaching for 10 years for that class. It's going up exponentially faster, and that's a little disheartening. So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, back to the
So
magazine.
just for the record, for those who don't know, there was this idea once upon a time that the mailman who brought you your item would actually collect the money for the person shipping it to you, collect on delivery.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
You would pay the mailman for the thing he was delivering, and they would send the money back to the person that shipped you the item.
and either cash or check.
Yes.
Just unimaginable in this day and age.
I will say this. I believe the post office does, in fact, still offer that service.
No.
I think they do.
You keep going. I'm looking this up when we talk.
I think they do. I can't imagine.
How much am I going to pay for that?
There's probably 3 people that use it. There's probably people down in Florida with high blood pressure meds or something. But some folks down in God's waiting room there or something. I mean, I can't imagine there's that many folks that actually use it, but I believe they do in fact still offer it.
They do.
Yeah. See.
I just.
Right.
I am bamboozled.
All right.
I want if okay, I demand. This is a demand. I rarely make demands, but I'm making one. If you listen to this and you know how to get to the GrogHeads forums, I demand, and you are a person who ever does things COD, I demand you post and explain yourself. What are you doing?
You're not doing Amazon Prime, is what you're doing.
Well, I mean, just wow. Okay, that's what COD is, and it still exists.
All right, so a bit of entertainment here. Gygax is the publisher. Jake's still our editor. Kim Mohan has not yet taken over as the editor. An interesting little chuckle. This month's contributing artists. Note artists, not authors. Ed Greenwood as a contributing artist.
We got to find his stuff. We got to see if we can spot it as we go through.
You may, in fact, be able to. I'm not really sure, but we'll see. Table of contents. Our special attraction is an AD&D module. As we noticed several episodes ago, the AD&D books have now started to be released, and so we are now full on into TSR, putting big support behind AD&D, not just the old no prefix D&D, which the famous red / sort of pink purple basic box and the light blue expert box were still a couple of years away at this point. I think probably 1 year away, roughly, as this issue is being published. Um, but TSR is putting a big push behind AD&D at this point for whatever various reasons. Um, and then there are a variety of other features. There's a whole bunch of different pieces on melee combat here, so that'll be kind of entertaining. And our regular columns, out and on a limb. Again, not sure if that was intentional or if that's just bad typing. But I'm enjoying the out and on a limb there. All right. Um, let's dive into our issue here. So
yeah, that's I'm trying to frame this under out on a limb. I'm trying to frame this in terms of a law or a rule we all ought to adopt, along the lines of, it's a game. Do what you want.
Yes. In other words, we should never need a last word on dwarven women's beards, is what you're telling me.
That's just it. As if there was any way to answer that question dispositively.
I happen to like this. So Gygax himself deigns to reply here. Sorry, but the dwarves from D&D and or AD&D are not drawn from the J.R.R. Not drawn from J.R.R. Tolkien. Bullshit. Excuse me. Any resemblance between the dwarves of my games and those of Tolkien's works might arise from the fact that both were drawn from Teutonic Norse mythology. Okay. So, yeah.
Well, wow. What one could say for pages. First of all, as you correctly observe, that's nonsense. But secondly, they were both drawn from Teutonic and Norse mythology. Actually, there's a whole lot of other mythology that feeds into Tolkien's dwarves that have nothing to do with either.
Yes.
And especially when you get into the Silmarillion and read about his different thoughts on dwarves that don't make it into the Lord of the Rings, and some of his drafts of the Lord of the Rings that are out there. But secondly, Gary and everybody else, if you really super want your dwarven women to have beards, or super don't, go with your bad self in either way.
I'm pretty certain there's really not a game effect that is dependent on the presence or absence of dwarven female beards.
Right. I just can't. Well, but like I say, we have to just try to subsume this under a rule that, again, amounts to, I don't know, what do you like?
Yeah.
Do that.
Pretty much. I do want to make a note over on the opposite page there, the legendary new game from TSR, that Knights of Camelot game.
So great.
Well, great. When we did our GrogCast where we were talking about most obscure games in our collections, that is the second most obscure Camelot board game that I have. So, because I do have a copy of the Wotan Games King Arthur in my collection.
Oh, yes. This is a special shout out to my very best friend, who I'm going to point to this episode and say, listen to it. I got this fresh off the shelf not long after it came out. And we sat in my parents' living room, played this apart. It just till it fell apart.
That may be the copy I have, because the one I have is falling apart.
And I'm here to tell, and he has now repurchased it. He actually posted that he found it and bought it pretty well mint, and has threatened to come. But I told him, I said, as I've reread the rules over the years, and this would be a great topic for a conversation on the GrogCast one day, what game or set of rules did you play just not a little wrong, a lot wrong? Like maybe you didn't miss a rule, you missed the whole point. We played Knights of Camelot cooperatively.
Wow. Yeah,
it never occurred to our, let's see, how old am I at this time? Our 14, 15-year-old minds to play this competitively against one another, which is probably why our game sessions never ended.
So you were probably like 30 years early on the co-op train there.
That's when first one I ever found was Knizia's Lord of the Rings, and I thought the heavens had opened and bright light had shone from it. So yeah.
If we end up doing that Grogcast sometime about games that you just managed to really mangle and play wrong, ask me about the time that me and Jim Snyder and my son managed to actually screw up rules in Kids of Carcassonne.
Nice.
You wouldn't think that a game with 4 rules could be messed up, but we managed. All right. Reflections on a real life cleric from the Reverend Arthur W. Collins.
Boy.
I think this is fabulous.
I gotta go back. I'm looking it up now. See, I figured it out how to look stuff up and be on the Skype machine. Dark Dungeons.
Thus, technology hath not passed you by yet.
When did Dark Dungeons come out?
Yeah. I just get a kick out of this down here at the bottom. However, when one is happily talking about fantasy gaming with a group of fellow hobbyists, sooner or later one is bound to ask what you do for a living, and it's then that things tend to get awkward.
Well, and look, I'm a observant Catholic. Just to make clear that I have no animus towards Christianity in any way. Raised one thing, now Catholic. But this whole thing about trying to square up hobby role-playing or hobby gaming with the Christian life always comes off as awkward and, frankly, often mawkish.
Yeah.
And trying to make it all that's it. You're trying to find the unified field theory for nerdery, and I'm not sure it exists.
It would be an interesting thing to attempt. The unified field theory of nerdery.
Yeah. It certainly at some does have to involve Gary Gygax, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
But no, we and look, this is before Dark Dungeons, the famous Jack Chick track, is 4 years later than this.
Yeah.
So this is a very early part of this conversation about what should believing people, what should the parents who are believing and have children think about this thing called role-playing or gaming or Dungeons and Dragons. I will say my parents were far less fond of my affinity for the rock group Kiss than they were about the fact that I was playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Were they convinced that Kiss stood for Knights in Satan's Service?
Well, yeah, convinced. They just accepted that as truth because they took one look at that freak show and were convinced.
That actually popped up in a trivia game that I can remember playing in the late 80s back when I was in high school. And over at a friend's place, there was some trivia game we were sitting around playing, and of course I'm massacring the music categories. Like, give me whatever music questions you want, I'm going to whip your ass on this. And one of them was, what does KISS stand for? And I said, don't tell me they put on there that it stands for Knights in Satan's Service, because that's been thoroughly disproven, over the years. And the guy's like, yeah, that's what it says. Is that your answer? That's like, you're going to rules lawyer me on an incorrect answer.
That is, son of a... But, and that's sad. But look, if you wanted to be in 8th grade when I was a kid, you had to own a copy of Kiss Alive 2, okay? And taking a look at the cover of Kiss Alive 2 was more than enough that any normal Protestant, good, God-fearing parent needed to convince them that their kid really ought not be doing this.
You could say that of any of the 3 albums immediately preceding Alive 2.
True. What is that? Love Gun?
Love Gun, Destroyer, and Rock and Roll Over.
And Rock and Roll Over.
Not in that order, mind you.
No, Rock and Roll Over, Destroyer, and Love Gun.
So,
I still have my Love Gun.
I not only have the bulk of the 70s Kiss albums on vinyl, I have the majority of them that I bought while I was living in Germany, and therefore do not have the SS Lightning Bolt logo on them.
Oh, roger that.
They have the backwards Z logo.
I've seen that. Do you actually have the popping Love Gun?
No.
That I kept.
No. Yeah. It occurs to me we could do an entirely separate audio video series just on random music crap if we so desired. What we need to do is pull up Chuck Klosterman's complete examination of the entire KISS catalog and just sit there and tear that article apart sometime.
There we go.
So, so it's interesting, the intersection of the clergy and fantasy role playing. I'm just going to zoom in, not because we're going to talk about any particular part, but because people that are listening to us may want to actually read some of this while we're talking about it. I I was raised Catholic. I'm a less observant Catholic than you are, than pretty much any other Catholic out there. But the I, I was raised Catholic, was heavily involved in a lot of Catholic youth group stuff growing up. Had a lot of friends who were religious, but not necessarily Catholic growing up. Had a couple of friends whose parents were very religious, very observant. Were convinced that D&D was the spawn of the devil because, hey, there's devils in these things. Yeah, okay, but let's take a look at how the conduct of the game actually works. Like, I get that we have this adventure that we're calling the Queen of the Demon Web Pits, and yet, what is your goal in said adventure? It's to kill her, right? I mean, it's to end her power over this area and to put a stop to the evil that she is presenting to the world. How is this a bad thing exactly? Like, tell me where the downside of this is. And there are a lot of folks that simply, yeah, look, I got it, that the stats exist that you can play the bad guys. Okay, when kids are playing Cowboys and Indians at 6, somebody wants to be Jesse James and go rob the bank. You know, I get it. Like, people like playing the bad guys on occasion, and yet how much of the game is set up around the fact that you're the heroes? Like, your job is to save the planet, not to pillage it. Your job is to be the good guys, to help those that need help. And that's, once I started, kind of showing them beyond just beyond just flipping to some random page and going, oh, look, devil, bad, and showed them, look, the reason they got the stats in there is so you can kill the dude, right? So you know how many hits it takes before he quits moving. That people sort of started to kind of come around. And I'm not going to say that I went on some grand crusade that suddenly convinced Christians that D&D was okay, but the people with whom I was willing, able to engage, not just willing, I was willing to engage a lot of them, but the ones I was able to engage, again, we mentioned King Arthur. You can play the adventures of King Arthur using these rules, right? It's your decision how you want to play. There's nothing inherently demonic built into any of this. But nobody had ever bothered to have that conversation with these folks. And to me, that was the biggest problem. Stop me if you've heard this before. People were just in such a hurry to be yelling at each other that they weren't bothering to have a civil conversation about stuff. And I learned long ago, that was one of the first times that I learned that, hey, if you just have a conversation with people, even if they don't come around to your viewpoint, at least they start to understand where you're coming from, and maybe this isn't such a bad, evil, nasty, awful thing. I do not envy this pastor at all. Having to show up at the church retreat with all of his other fellow pastors. Oh, what do you do in your spare time? I play them their devil games. So.
Yeah, and look, I'm far too down a road, I guess I would say, to ever worry over much about that conversation. I mean, I was on my way to the ministry when I became Catholic, PhD, Doctor of Divinity, and all that other stuff. And I have never, probably because I got into it so soon, been able to wrap my head around the objections.
Yeah.
To role-playing, to fantasy, to Dungeons and Dragons, to deities and demigods. I'll say only this. There is a part, I suspect, can't prove it, and they'll deny it, where folks, when you open up deities and demigods, and you go through this, the thing that hits you, unless you have the Cthulhu version, let me say, you're looking at a book that includes many, many gods that human beings have believed in at one time or another. To various degrees, they have accepted these deities as their own, not as some abstract literary exercise, but as their gods.
Yeah.
And in the Judeo-Christian ethic, that can give people the wig. There's the whole ancient notion that the gods of antiquity, the pagan gods, are actually demons. There's all these other things. But there's this dread fear that comes from accepting the fact that humanity has worshipped deities whose names weren't Yahweh, whose names weren't Jesus, over the course of its history. That doesn't change the Christian narrative any.
Yeah.
But I can remember paging through deities and demigods in my spare time and having people go, well, why do you study those things? I say, I don't know. Why do I read Bullfinch's mythology?
Yeah.
Why do I read the Epic of Gilgamesh?
All deities and demigods did was give me the stats to go kill those things.
Yeah, it's not. They didn't. Believe me, there is nothing in there, not one little thing that was the invention of somebody associated with TSR, absent, as you say, game stats.
Yeah. So, all right. So I do like the fact that. Hold on, got to go back up the page here. Task Force Games gave you a page on which to take notes.
Yeah, I just.
You know what I how
I don't think they got the ad to them in time.
Exactly. That's what I think happened. The ad didn't get there before paste up. So, we've got some articles on melee combat, and the artwork here is progressing slightly beyond 5th grade binder scribbles. This one is dare say actually competent. Not Ed Greenwood though. If you take a look,
I'm checking.
Jim Holloway, not Ed Greenwood for that one. But we have several articles on melee combat here. The issue that I get using Roman numerals to sort of but come on, guys.
We so loved. We all, and I'm going to say this generally. We nerds fell in love with this Gothic font. We loved the minute we had the ability to type it and to have it in any format. We loved it. And then we got around to Roman numerals and didn't know what the heck to do.
Yeah.
Because by the time you get down to Melee 3, it looks ridiculous.
Well, part of what looks ridiculous, put a damn space in here, people.
Yeah.
Put a damn space.
That too. Yeah.
It's not that hard. It's the big bar at the bottom of the keyboard. Well, so interestingly, in case you needed that little bit of hair splitting in your percentile determinations of non-pole, non-missile weapons, so basically bar fighting distance, you know, what do you need as a strength to wield something? What do you need as a comparable dexterity? What's the average damage when they hit and the average damage per attempt? Now, here's the thing. You're looking at this and you're crunching all these numbers and you're going, what the... Okay, I've got the World Series on in the background right now. You want to guess how many comparable looking stats start to show up for all these hitters?
Here's my question.
1 out, runners in scoring position with a right-hander on the mound in innings 1 through 4.
I would like to lay out a question and have this something we study go forward. This is a Steve Jackson game. How is this showing up in Dragon?
Because Dragon Magazine covered everything. So if we pull out, this was September 1980? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
If we pull out the September 1980 issue of the General, there's not a damn thing from anybody other than Avalon Hill in it.
Right.
If we pull out the September 1980 Strategy and Tactics, there's going to be some non-SPI stuff in there, but mainly it's going to be a bunch of historical articles, and like any game-specific stuff is probably pretty SPI-focused with an occasional something here and there. But look, Dragon Magazine didn't have a problem covering lots, and to me, this is part of what's missing from today's industry is that we've got lots of house organs out there for a while. I'm glad that Mark Walker's Yeah magazine covers more than just flying pig stuff. But when he was running Lock and Load, the Line of Fire magazine from Lock and Load covered Lock and Load, and that was it. That was all he talked about. And the General only ever talked about Avalon Hill stuff, and how many house magazines have we seen that's all they ever talked about, where Dragon Magazine didn't have a problem talking about non-TSR games.
because this game is going to become the fantasy trip.
Yes.
It's about to wander off into advanced melee. But oh my God, this is the second time this has happened in our little journeys. Do you have Melee 2 there?
Yes.
All fighters not created equal. I have this article somewhere.
You want the basic formula for figuring out experience points?
Yep. But now oh my gosh, I loved the fantasy trip. I loved Melee and Advanced Melee. I beat Steve Jackson at Melee at Gen Con. I have an autographed copy of Melee to prove it. And he was sitting there. Steve would sit there in a much smaller booth, and he would say, if you beat me at it, you can win the game. And I said, I've got the game. Can we still play? And he had nothing to do, so we played, and I beat him. Because I had played this game endlessly. For those who don't know, Melee started out as a map that's, I think it's actually smaller than the size of a sheet of paper.
Yeah, could well be.
And it's got on it a series of... It's supposed to be a pit. It's a pit fight.
If I was recording from the game den, I would walk across the room and go look. But I'm recording from my living room so I can watch the baseball game. And
Sure.
so I'm not going to leave the house, go through the garage, up to the office, and go find it.
So you get this little bitty thing, and you get this little bitty map, and you got these white counters with blue print on them. Very nice for their time, actually.
And let's make a note. All of the characters were identified by single letters, so that you had character A, B, C, and D in the capitals of this medieval calligraphy font that we're looking at for the headers.
Yes, and you would just run at, and all it was is stat out your guy, gear him up, and send him into fight. That was it. That was all you did, and for that reason, every game was, if it took 5 minutes, that was a lot. So you could play 20 battles in less than 2 hours easily.
Yeah.
To the point that at a local con here years ago, I actually ran a Swiss chess Melee tournament that was very well received. Because you just pop through it and people do well, whatever. I remember this conversation and this text at the bottom of page 11. This system, while more complex than what is presented in the Melee rules, will only add about 30 seconds worth work with any $5 pocket calculator. And I remember, and it's like, was there nothing in this era of gaming that we didn't want to complicate just a little bit more?
And usually in the name of realism.
Right. It's because Steve had built, and I don't think this was Steve Jackson Games, I think this is still metagaming.
Yes.
That he comes out with this beautiful, elegant system. Melee and then eventually Wizardry. Both incredible.
Well, it was
games.
Melee, Magic, and then later there was the fantasy trip that kind of unified it all.
Right. Well, it's actually Wizard.
Is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Wizardry was the computer game.
Right. It's Melee Wizard, and then Advanced Melee, and then Advanced Wizard. And then you're right. Then it becomes the fantasy trip, and then most famously, it becomes a series of these little bitty quests that all come in a tuck box, including the quest for the unicorn gold, where he actually hid a solid gold unicorn in Austin, Texas, and it gave you all the clues to go and find it.
Yeah.
But this, all the way to my point, this era was all about, oh, what a beautiful, simple little game you made. It cost me $5, and I've got an incredible amount of enjoyment out of it. Let's jack it up with really complex rules.
Needs to be more crunchy.
That's great.
But we're not done, because, hey, we need to add dragons. The parry tactical matrix.
Let's
the
do
offensive parry tactic and the defensive parry tactic.
That's nothing we'd rather do.
Right? The general procedure. Not the specific procedure, but the general procedure. There's our weapons tactical matrix. Between the attacker's weapons and the defender's weapons. So if the attacker is going fangs and claws and the defender is going lance, then there is a die roll modification there.
Yeah, because this was all necessary.
Couldn't they have laid it out in a monospace font so that the columns are at least in line?
Yes. Yeah. Well.
All right, let's
You
get back over to the city state of the world emperor. Come on, Judges Guild.
give it. Give it. Give it.
So, some number of years ago, I did have the good fortune to sit down and have a couple of drinks with Bob Bledsaw. Um, on our way, it was late one afternoon at Gen Con 2006, and Mishler had just linked up with Bob Bledsaw. They were attempting to relaunch a bunch of the old Judges Guild stuff under Mishler's Adventure Games publishing imprint. And Mishler was telling me all about it because I'd known James for almost 20 years at that, well, about 15 years at that point, just through correspondence. And so we adjourned to a local brewery. Was the exhibit hall closed, and it was me and Zabek, and we had at least one other person with us, and I think Sean Drummy was there, who at the time worked for Matrix, and Bob and James Mishler and somebody else in their party. And basically, we all sat there and listened to Bob Bledsaw tell war stories from the mid-'70s when he was running Judges Guild and doing official TSR stuff, and a lot of the inside baseball gossip stories from around TSR in the early years of role-playing. And it was fascinating. I think the rest of us at the table, other than Bob, probably said 15 words combined. And there's not a damn one of them that will tell you that the evening was wasted.
Yeah.
It was fantastic listening to him. Okay, ready, aim, firearm. Because what Melee needed was firearms.
Was guns.
Was guns. Right? Metagaming's microgame Melee represents an attempt to simulate all possible forms of individual combat in Europe from Stone Age to the end of the medieval period.
No,
has
it doesn't.
one glaring omission in the stable of possible weapons, the lack of any black powder weaponry. You know, you're not really missing it.
It just drives me nuts when I see things like it. No, it's an attempt to do all these things. No, it wasn't. That's not why it worked.
Yeah. It was capable of all those things, but that doesn't mean it was designed for that, right? I mean, let's face it. There's an entire circuit that travels the country that is, doing track racing in pickup trucks. Just because you can do it doesn't mean it was designed for it.
Right.
So,
and not just because somebody sat around and went, "Hey."
Yeah. It was interesting. You mentioned that it was a fairly tiny map that was intended to basically be like a fighting pit. I suspect that the fighting pit piece was probably grafted onto the fact that the box was so small they could only fit such a large map in there.
Well, but by the time they get to Wizardry, they've got a map that's probably 4 times the size.
Yeah, well, it may be that they'd cut a better publishing deal with somebody that had a folding machine that could put a bigger map in there.
You may not be wrong about that.
Giants of the Earth, classic heroes from fiction and literature. So here's a question that I want to ask you. C.L. Moore, H. Rider Haggard. First of all, we're back to 5th grade pencil sketches. What do you think the royalty payments to C.L. Moore for this were?
Oof.
If at all.
I was about to say some multiple of 0 would be my guess.
And nobody cared back then. Because, quite frankly, they weren't going to make a ton of money of this. And I'm betting C.L. Moore got more readers out of people looking at this article than would have ever lost money from somehow having some random stats for Jarrell's stats being exposed to the world there. One of our previous episodes, we had the Saturday morning monsters in there, right? The Green Giant people would probably get a little irked at the fact that the Jolly Green Giant showed up statted out as a D&D monster. I get that. But classic heroes from fiction and literature, the odds that Robert Howard's estate was complaining about Valeria being statted out for Dragon Magazine, probably non-existent. Right? Probably not happening.
Man.
I'm wondering if Dragon was even big enough for them to notice at the time yet. I'm just saying.
Well, but, though, we sort of felt that if you were giving credit, if you were saying whose it was, that
somehow it was okay.
Well, not just that, but we didn't see as much value in IP then as we do now.
Yeah.
There was no risk. Well, there still isn't of there being a C.L. Moore movie with an attendant run of action figures.
Yeah.
That these things are just not out there in a way that you have to protect the product. The extreme example, of course, being Games Workshop, which, if they could get away with it, would copyright the word orc. In fact, they have, spelled with a K.
Yes. I was going to say, they did a version of it. I'm curious if you came out with a line of orcs with 2 Ks, whether or not that would stand up in court against Games Workshop.
They'd certainly come for you and try to say that it doesn't.
Oh, they would try. And yet, because they were so specific about, no, our orc is spelled with a K, therefore we can copyright it. The fact that you use 2 Ks, clearly you're not violating their copyright.
I have friends that do IP for a living, so I'd have to consult over there.
I would be curious to know what they say. An early Tom Moldvay article here. Tom Moldvay has been immortalized in the annals of D&D, in the world of Mystara. He is immortalized in the realm of Yavdlum. They spelled his name backwards, slapped it on a country, and said, "There we go." That's where it comes from.
Well, there's a lot of that.
Yes. Yes, there is. Giants in the earth. We had giants in the earth here. We got more giants in the earth. Sigurd Fafnir's Bane.
Now you're just making stuff up.
Yeah, well, I'm not making them up.
No, and this is one of my mythologies. This whole, as I believe Gary Gygax would use the word, Scandinavian Teutonic myth. This is the stuff, but we talked about it last episode. We talked about it last episode, giving him stats.
It was with. We only got 3 episodes to choose from as to when we might have done this.
All right, so let's call it the last one. Perhaps people will go back and check us out, see if we're wrong. But 20th level fighter, and we had to throw 12th level magic user on top of it,
and 8th level cleric on top of that.
Right, and what's the point of the? Oh, where's the? Oh yeah, and 102 hit points. Yeah, give me a call.
So. All right, Dragon's Blood. There we go. Seldom do we at the Dragon, and you who read the Dragon, TD, the Dragon, have an opportunity to get both sides of the story in the same issue of magazine.
Well, D would sound funny.
Yes. Article number 1 and article number 2 are right here, one after the other, together and in conjunction with the descriptive essay on Sigurd Fafnir's Bane, which also appears in this issue. They comprise the definitive treatise on the subject of gaining magical benefits from dragon's blood.
I don't mind somebody proposing stats and seeing if that works in a game.
Yeah.
It's that silly word definitive again that I find so terribly troubling.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I kind of enjoyed this pair of articles for this reason. It's not a bad game concept of, hey, some random Norse legend somewhere said this dude smeared himself with dragon's blood and was therefore impervious in the duel or whatever. Cool, that's kind of neat. I wonder if my character could do that. Let me sneak up on the dragon, slice his leg where he's got a bunch of blood there, hurry up and smear it on my body before he can turn around and bite me with his fangs. Oh, whoops, now I'm impervious. Hey, that sounds kind of cool. And so the idea that folks are sort of hashing out, hey, what are some ways in which we could actually do this in the game? I think that's kind of cool. The fact that it's put out there as this debate that's an attempt to decide which one is right, I find that a little silly. Hey, here's a couple of different ways in which you could do this in your game. Pick and choose which one you want to use, or use all of them as inspiration for your own mashup of it, not, hey, here's the right answer. Dude, we're talking about elves and dwarves and orcs and dragons. There's no right answer. Right? It's not like we can go down to the nearest cave, knock, knock, knock. Hey, Mr. Dragon, what's the right answer? I mean, that doesn't happen.
It's, what's the rule? Is it fun?
Yeah.
What do you like? Then do that.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Instead, we're going to worry about fantasy realism.
Well, no. I'm about to pop a valve. This ad may be the most tedious, noxious ad I've read that didn't have curse words or naked people. First of all, RuneQuest combat system was created by a charter member of the Society for Creative Anachronism. Coming around to me, who did 14 years at the Renaissance Fair, and saying that because you were in SCA and not nay a charter member of SCA, that gives you some sort of a edge, no pun, in terms of fighting with edged weapons and armor. That's funny. You're fighting fat people who have not spent their entire lives becoming soldiers. Knock it off. If you look at the cholesterol index of most people in SCA events, it's above the human normal. And then this. RuneQuest's magic system was patiently assembled. I don't know what that looks like. By scholars and practitioners of real magic and the old religion.
I like the old religion, as though there's only one.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly my point. I don't have to go after paganism. I'm a Catholic. You have your own beliefs. That's cool. But you don't get to say that yours is the old religion.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
you don't know.
I do want to back up to one remark you made about this ad you were talking about, the most tedious ad not involving curse words or naked people. I have yet to see a tedious ad that has nudity.
Okay.
I'm not saying they don't exist, just that I have yet to be exposed to them.
No pun.
Oh, no, the pun was there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I really should have let it lie then. But the assembled by scholars and practitioners of, behold the mighty wizard. Knock it off.
Yeah.
It's a game.
Yeah.
It's fun. Let it be fun.
Well, it would be fun in any room not involving those guys.
It's
not that RuneQuest wasn't a fun game. I just wouldn't want to play it with those guys.
Right. Oh, and that's the other thing. I think you're selling your game horribly. And capitalize fantasy and realism for the love of God.
Well, with our benefit of hindsight, we can certainly see that. However, given what we've seen elsewhere in this issue with the trend towards over-crunchiness and over-complicating things, let's face it, I'm not sure that the copy in this ad was somehow a negative to many of the people that are reading the other articles in this issue and going, yeah!
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move a little quicker here. We're gonna skip past the trolls, just because we got to keep moving and proclaiming the arrival of the lords of Valletta. We're gonna keep moving here. Up on a soapbox, the art of good generalship.
Okay, just the first sentence.
Sometimes we wargamers.
What? Who? What magazine is this in?
Last time I checked, we're reading Dragon Magazine.
We wargamers.
Yes. Funny.
Look at that.
Yeah.
That's really all we have to say about this, isn't it? I read through a big chunk of this, and there's some interesting, kind of groggy conversations in here.
Yes, and quite frankly, this article in terms of the art of good generalship. First of all, come on, guys, we need a pull quote, we need a graphic, we need something to draw visual eye away from just the Up on a Soapbox logo. It's a good article. It certainly has application for pure fantasy role-playing types when you start talking about mass combat, mass battles. Because let's face it, just about every battle that ever ends up filmed on screen that you could use for inspiration looks like the first meeting engagement from Braveheart. And George Lucas apparently studied at the School of Braveheart Tactics, despite the fact that they have interplanetary laser guns. He still just got them blindly charging in mass into each other.
Yes.
There's some decent information in here about sort of principles of tactics and how you can fight a better fight. It's not bad. We're going to keep moving, though, because I want to make sure we've got time to get to the thing we want to get to. We've discussed the figure ads ad nauseum. We're going to keep moving here.
All right.
The bizarre of the bizarre was always very bizarre, but always fairly entertaining in that, hey, let's not just throw out some random interesting thing that we could have there to beef up the items in your campaign. Let's put them on a chart. Why? Because we need them on a chart. All right, here we go. Not just the view from Avalon Hill in the simulation corner, but look who wrote it.
Yeah, John himself.
Our buddy John. So John is talking to Tom Shaw, the VP of Avalon Hill, and so let's talk about what's Avalon Hill looking at in the hobby industry. And at the time, Avalon Hill is is kind of the prestige publisher of the big box, the games that your parents were willing to put on their library shelves, right? I mean, that's kind of the market niche that Avalon Hill occupied. And we're, this is the era in which Panzerblitz, Panzer Leader, Squad Leader are selling 10,000 copies, right? These days, we're happy if we can sell 500 of something because that means we can go to press. So.
Well, it's, the first thing you have to realize, and this is the thing that snaps a lot of people's heads off, is when you read down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs.
The Tom says that AH has tried to widen its distribution.
But it's based on this perspective
that one.
Of 22 years. When this is being written in September of 1980, Avalon Hill is 22 years old. Think of that.
Oh, yeah.
We sometimes forget how old the old girl is. And how, if you read this article, everything seemed to be going really well. They seemed to have diversified into a good space. They had released War and Peace, Fortress Europa, D-Day was coming out, the new one, and then they were about to release The Longest Day, their one true monster game.
Yeah, it's the longest game.
And so they were getting ready to do all this. They had already gone through this generation of the generation of Chancellorsville and Alexander, written, by the way, by Gary Gygax, the Feudal and Acquire, and all these other games that are legends of the hobby by the time they roll around here into the early 80s. And as you read this article, it's a who's who of significant people that rolled off, including, I couldn't believe this one, but when you read down, it's on the second column, second full paragraph, AH has deliberately hired personnel, including former SPI R&D staffers Frank Davis and Kevin Zucker.
Yeah.
The great one. It's what? And
one would argue this article is being written by the great one, right? John Prados is no slouch.
Right. No. And so these are our heroes talking to our heroes, the legends of this hobby. But in addition, Kevin Flippin Zucker being hired by AH from SPI in the Dragon magazine.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yes,
amazing
it was. Piece. All right, here's the next bit of fun. Avalon Hill meets the computer.
How many did you have?
Actually, none. Remember, my dad had one of those 128K beige box Macs, and that was 4 years from now.
You come from a line of people that play computers, not destined to play games.
Yes. I
had 3 of the 4.
So I'm one of those rare hobby dudes that actually never had the TRS-80 or any of the Radio Shack or Tandy series. We had the Commodore series at school. I learned to program in BASIC on a Commodore PET and upgraded from there to learning to program on the Commodore VIC-20. We had one at the school. You had to do enough cool stuff on the PET before they would let you play with the VIC-20.
Oh.
From there, I worked on a bunch of the Atari series.
I had everything but Midway. I did not have Midway. But let me say, now remember, and we talked about this just last episode. This was last episode. We talked about loading things onto a TRS-80 cassette.
Yes.
Kids, young ones, children, gather around the fire.
The cassette's in the picture.
Uncle Brandt and Grandpa Jim are going to tell you a story. Go to Tom's capsule review of Avalon Hill Microcomputer Games, page 33.
Well, let's also throw out how awesome is it that Tom Wham is writing reviews and not just designing games.
Yes.
Let's take a momentary pause for that one.
Take a look and realize
the average bytes of these guys.
Yeah, take a look. How many bytes? This is bytes, not gigabytes, not megabytes, not even kilobytes.
I would bet that if you could pull up the phone book entry of someone for whom you have a photo, multiple points of contact, probably some birthdays, anniversaries, maybe even a mailing address listed in your cell phone, that it's going to take up more than the 8,500 bytes that B-1 Bomber used to use to run.
And how long did it take to load B-1 Bomber on your TRS-80? 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
Yeah.
People, I never want to hear you talk about load times again.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid you're playing Midway campaign where you're approaching a 5-minute load time.
I mean, that's like hit play and go to the bathroom.
All of which, by the way, have graphics. None.
It's reminiscent of war games. I want to play Global Thermonuclear War.
Well, and everyone, and let's see, what rating does he give them?
Oh, sorry, I skipped on by because I was starting to take a look at some of the other pieces in there.
I'm just
overall ratings on a 1 to 10. None of them.
He doesn't like a one of them.
Yes.
He does not like that, and that's probably fair. Okay.
Yeah. And so here we get into the details of the various games, to include Nuke War. There's Bismarck, and here's the don't buy pirate programs. Computer programs are just like books and games. They have copyrights. Manufacturer charges the customer for what it costs to research, produce, package, and distribute. Right? So here's a blast. Unlike the recorded music industry, the home computer game industry is in its infancy, and there's no real standard yet for how to market such things. So we're trying to figure it out. I was waiting for, unlike the recorded music industry, games are easy to pirate.
Throw them into a copier.
Yeah. Some additional game reviews. We've got Perilous Encounters. We've got Dark Nebula from GDW, back when they were still doing Series 120 games using the Imperium system. So this is space gaming. But again, Dark Nebula for under $6. That's like 2 weeks allowance right there. Here we have the minis against a black background. We still haven't figured out how contrast works. Dastardly Deeds and Devious Devices. How can we screw people? We're jumping ahead a little bit because there's a particular article I want to get to, but we are going to pause here with the Electric Eye. I used to love this. Here's your program listing. Here is what you need to type in order to make this program run on your computer at home.
Okay, once again, much like with COD earlier in the show, how many of our listeners know why this printout looks this way?
Oh, they don't. That's a 45 line thing, right?
Yeah.
Our listeners that have the volume up more than halfway in order to be able to make out what we're saying know what we're talking about. Anybody else doesn't have a clue.
This is amazing.
Anybody that's watching this on YouTube on a cell phone doesn't have a clue.
I can't. I wonder sometimes why my vision is as poor as it is, and I think it's because I typed things like this in.
Yeah, could well be. All right. Again, we're skipping ahead a little quickly here because I wanted to get to this one for you, Jim. I knew you were going to have fun with this. Guerrilla warfare, Napoleonic style.
See, because once upon a time, there were Napoleonic war game rules in the Dragon. That's awesome.
Basic outline for skirmish gaming in the Napoleonic period. Each figure represents one individual. Not the mass hordes of Jena Auerstadt, where one figure represents 100.
No, this is man-to-man combat in the age of Napoleon.
Mano a mano. Right?
So they want us to do French versus British, as I'm just kind of blazing through here.
Well, because
Just
it's guerrilla warfare, so you're primarily talking the Iberian Peninsula campaigns.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering if they're. This is. Oh, here we go. This is what I'm wanting.
But this is essentially, we talked earlier about the melee rules, about how do you try to make them fast, furious, fun, to steal the line from Savage Worlds. How do you make it an enjoyable and fast and difficult, but challenging but fun, not difficult, challenging but fun game at the man-to-man level? Well, let's throw in some muskets and some really ridiculously tall hats, because we can.
Well, I'm just
All grenadiers in the line, +1 for individual marksmanship. Because individual marksmanship was really a highly treasured concept in the Napoleonic era.
I have read and seen the Sharp shows. I know. Those are all historically accurate.
But here's some entertainment for you. Setting up a campaign.
Yes, yeah, also, how do you not love the fact if you go, I think it's just one page earlier. Yes, one page earlier. The wounds are rolled randomly.
Yeah, because you didn't know where the hell the bullet was going to hit.
Right.
Nobody was aiming back then. You sort of point it in the direction of the mass of guys marching towards you and hope you hit somebody.
Because if you roll a 12, you're killed immediately.
If you roll a 2 through a 4, you're killed immediately. There was a lot of getting killed immediately. You notice what's not in here, though. There's not dyes of gangrene 3 weeks later.
Right. Well, hopefully that comes out in the campaign rules. So you can put it in Russia? Good.
Yes.
Wow. So this is, yes, folks, just remember, never let anybody tell you different. There were Napoleonic rules.
In a Russian campaign, you get to add Cossacks. No word on whether or not they're appropriately dragified. In any campaign, it is best to set up a cast of characters. That's one of those kind of no-shit statements, right? For pretty much any campaign of any game, of any type, of any system, of any genre, set up a cast of characters. So,
my goodness.
Here's your sample scenario. Now, I love this. We're doing man-to-man combat, right?
Yes.
110 Fusiliers, 23 Grenadiers.
And there we are. This is the time of gaming. Look, this is something that I've actually recently written about. One of the great revelations of the brilliant De Bellis Antiquitatis is that you could do an entire ancient army with just a little over 100 figures. Okay? But in this game, which is supposed to be man-to-man combat in the world of Napoleon, we're going to actually do a French company. And this is a true peninsular company. 110 Fusiliers, 23 Grenadiers, 29 Legers, 6 sergeants, and 4 officers. I haven't seen it here, but I'm going to guess. I have to scroll up to the wounds.
I'm just thinking the 110 Fusiliers, right? That's 110 Fusilier figures that you need to distinguish so that when, Fusilier number 79 takes damage, you don't accidentally apply it to Fusilier 54.
Well, that's what I'm looking at the wound table. If I take a minor wound, the most likely outcome on a 2d6 is a 7. The most likely outcome is a minor wound, cannot run. So for this reason, I must now mark this character with a wound to be distinguished from a severe leg wound, to be distinguished from a head wound, shoulder wound, or guys.
I do like that they actually fight out the sample scenario for you, though, because they tell you who's got what and how they're doing stuff. And so to begin with, who's doing what in here is heavily laden. Both players agree its movement should be 6 inches per turn with a maximum of 10 possible. So both players agree. Not the rules say it should do this. Both players agree that this should be the case.
Yeah, that works well. I'm just kind of curious to see if there are any maps or anything, but I guess not. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
can you imagine the if the stores were sold out, don't jump ad running in any magazine today?
Where is that? Oh, my. Whoa. I didn't get down that far. Nope.
Not happening.
Especially the charming vista of man that shouldn't be wearing that tight a t-shirt with a brick around his neck.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you imagine the cars going by under that highway overpass where they're shooting this ad?
Yeah, that's because I'm amazed you don't actually get a visit from your local constabulary.
All right, convention schedule. Rides wanted or offered for the conventions.
Booyah.
Would like to go to DungeonCon 81. I need a ride from the LA area.
I'll
And
pay
by
for
the way, here's my
transportation.
home address, published in a magazine.
And they will be done for free. If all you do is you send it to Dragon Publishing, Lake Geneva. Awesome.
All right, the Dragon's Bestiary. We got some stats for some dudes. We've got some form of graphic novel storytelling going on back here. We got Phineas Fingers. Here's your fantasy trip. Melee and Wizard going into our micro quest. The advanced rules of Into the Labyrinth. Tolkienar's Lair. There we go. There's the fantasy trip series.
Wow.
Traveler ad.
Whoa.
Yes. Not just whoa, but color ink on the Traveler ad inside the magazine. Right? You notice the rest of the magazine's all black and white.
That was a few bucks.
That was a few bucks. So we have an adventure here, back when they used to publish full adventures in Dragon Magazine, not just Dungeon Magazine, which was nothing but adventures. Here's a full-on adventure. Here's some, again, not fifth grade notebook, pen, ballpoint pen on notebook art. Some halfway decent art. Again, it's the mandatory. Here's the description for every room in the map. Here's what's going on in each room. These two portcullises bar entry to important areas of the dungeon because it's Dungeons and Dragons. You gotta have a dungeon. So this is a fairly standard at the time description of some kind of adventure. And let's face it, some of the Dragon Magazine adventures were quite good. A couple of them were.
And look, and for all the stuff we throw at them, there's still a part of me going through here thinking of my group at the third level gym at Market University High School back in the day. And sitting here going, all right, boys, let's get this thing rolling.
Yeah.
And we're going to, where does it all start? The level with the entry, well secluded and accessible only by a ledge.
Yes.
Great.
That's up here on the top of our map. But yeah, so I mean, these are the graph paper maps that we all grew up with and that we all wasted our time in chemistry class drawing when we were supposed to be paying attention to pH levels.
All right, now let's also throw back a memory to the day before we could all fool around on our cell phones in class.
Yeah.
If for all the way down to these great maps, if you take a look, if you zoom in just a little bit, either one, doesn't matter where, but just get outside the outlines of the map. You see that hatching?
Yeah. That was all done by hand.
That's all hand hatching, kids. And I'm telling you, that is a way to kill a boring philosophy class like you can't even believe.
Yep.
It makes your map pop. You've already done it on your quadrille book of paper, and you just turn your head off and cross-hatch till you can't no more. So great.
Survived many an algebra class in high school doing that, or something very similar.
Yeah, didn't so much learn the stuff, but I cross-hatched like a goon.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem I had with the algebra class is I already knew the stuff. That's a tale for another day, but the short version is the German schools that I was attending in 8th and 9th grades didn't separate algebra and geometry. They just called the class math. And because I didn't have anything on my transcript that said algebra or geometry, they were not willing to let me out of algebra class. So I was in 10th grade taking Algebra 1, which was a class I just did not need to be taken.
And that's what you get.
I did my homework in Roman numerals one time because I was bored. So this is the map here was sort of tucked in at the end. So this is the end of the issue, which makes me wonder, based on the way this was put together, if that Traveler ad wasn't in fact the last page.
That's the back cover.
That's the back cover there. And so as you can see down here, our page numbers are M1, M2, M3. That this was clearly some sort of insert into the magazine. But this is Dragon 41. This is a fairly crunchy issue of lots of stats, lots of wargamey, groggy content in terms of the way in which combat's being handled in melee. We've got multiple wargame articles, very specific wargame articles in here between Napoleonic guerrilla warfare, an update on Avalon Hill. We've got some crunchiness here. You know, that's.
No, I enjoyed this one. This is one that I would definitely open up again. I don't know if I'm going to play the war game, but it's worth reading, and I would definitely take the module for a spin.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been Dragon Magazine number 41 as we go through Dragon Up the Past. There's no, I don't have the clock right in front of me. There's no way we did this in less than an hour. But, you know, that's, even there, we skipped through a whole lot of pages, and it still took us over an hour. So,
we're just having a good time.
We are. And how many drinks in are you?
It's a number bigger than 1 and smaller than 1,000,000.
Yeah. So it's Origins drinking. Gotcha.
Roger that.
Fair enough. All right, we're gonna call an index on this one. That's not INDE. I've been told I needed to clarify that. In the military, an index, ENDEX, is end of exercise. We're gonna index this. We're gonna stop. And we'll move on, and we'll pick up with another issue of Dragon Magazine for you guys to listen to shortly.